The auctioneer's gavel struck wood with a crack that echoed through the saloon in Clifton Hill, Arizona Territory, and Graham Eckhart felt his heart hammer against his ribs as he realized what he had just done. $27.50. That was all the money he had to his name, and he had just bid it on a woman standing at the front of the room with her chin held high despite the tears streaming down her face. It was April 1883, and the spring heat had settled over the dusty town like a heavy blanket. Graham had ridden into Clifton Hill 3 days ago, looking for work at the copper mines that had drawn so many desperate men to this corner of the Arizona Territory. He was 25 years old and had never known the touch of a woman beyond a brief handshake. The ranch where he grew up in Montana had been so remote that the nearest neighbor was 15 miles away, and by the time his parents died of typhoid when he was 19, he had grown comfortable with solitude. 6 years of drifting from town to town, working whatever jobs he could find, had only reinforced his isolation. But something about the sight of Laura Patterson standing on that makeshift stage had broken through the walls he had built around himself. She was 23, he would learn later, with auburn hair that caught the lamplight and eyes the color of creek stones. Her dress was worn but clean, and she held herself with a dignity that seemed impossible given the circumstances. The auctioneer, a portly man named Virgil who ran the general store, cleared his throat. "Sold to the gentleman in the back. Come collect your bride, sir." Graham pushed through the crowd of disappointed miners and ranch hands. Up close, Laura was even more beautiful, though her face was pale with exhaustion. She would not look at him, keeping her gaze fixed on some point past his shoulder. "Madam," he said quietly, his voice rough from disuse, "I am Graham Eckhart. I promise you I will treat you with respect." She finally met his eyes then, and he saw a flicker of something in her expression. Not hope exactly, but maybe a small measure of relief that it was not one of the leering men who had been calling out crude comments during the bidding. "Laura Patterson," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for not letting Hutchins win." Graham glanced over his shoulder at the man in question, a mine foreman known for his cruelty. He felt a wave of protectiveness wash over him that was both foreign and fierce. He paid his money to Virgil, who counted the bills and coins with practiced efficiency. The whole transaction felt wrong, like buying a horse or a piece of furniture, but Graham did not know how else to help her. The sheriff had made it clear that morning when Laura's situation became public knowledge. Her father had died owing money to half the town, and the creditors wanted their due. Since she had no family and no means to pay, the town council had decided this was the most practical solution. She would gain a husband and protection, and the debt would be settled. "You will need to see the preacher to make it legal," Virgil said, sliding the money into a lockbox. "He is waiting at the church." Graham nodded and turned to Laura. "Do you have belongings you need to collect?" "Everything I owned was sold yesterday to pay part of the debt," she said. "I am wearing all I have left." The walk to the church was silent. Graham tried several times to think of something comforting to say, but words had never come easily to him. The sun was setting, painting the desert landscape in shades of orange and purple. He had always found beauty in such moments, but tonight he could only think about the woman walking beside him, her shoulders squared against whatever fate awaited her. The church was a simple wooden structure at the end of the main street. Reverend Palmer stood waiting by the door, his Bible already in hand. He was an older man with kind eyes who had come to Clifton Hill the year before, hoping the dry air would help his ailing lungs. "Miss Patterson, Mr. Eckhart," he greeted them. "I wish the circumstances were different, but I will pray that God blesses this union nonetheless." The ceremony was brief. Graham spoke his vows clearly, though his hands trembled as he slipped a simple gold band onto Laura's finger. It had belonged to his mother, the only thing of value he still carried. Laura's voice shook as she spoke her promises, but she did not cry. Graham admired her strength even as his heart ached for what she had lost. When Reverend Palmer declared them married, Graham did not kiss her. It did not feel right, not when everything about this day had been forced upon her. Instead, he offered his arm, and she took it with a ghost of gratitude in her eyes. "I have a small house on the edge of town," Graham said as they walked back into the cooling evening air. "It is not much, but it is clean and the roof does not leak. You can have the bedroom. I will sleep in the main room." Laura stopped walking and turned to face him fully for the first time. "You do not expect me to share your bed." "I expect nothing from you, madam. I mean, Laura. I could not stand by and watch them treat you like property to be sold to the highest bidder, but I will not add to your suffering by making demands. We are married in the eyes of the law, but I will not force anything more unless you wish it someday." She studied his face for a long moment, and he felt exposed under her gaze. He was not a handsome man. His features were too rough, his nose had been broken twice, and he had a scar along his jawline from a childhood accident. But he tried to let her see his sincerity. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why would you spend all your money on a stranger and expect nothing in return?" Graham thought about the question. He had asked himself the same thing a dozen times since the bidding started. "I have been alone most of my life," he said slowly. "I always thought that was what I wanted. But when I saw you up there, looking so brave even though you must have been terrified, I realized maybe I had just been waiting for the right reason to stop being alone. And maybe you could use someone who will not hurt you. That seemed like enough of a reason." Laura's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. "I will try to be a good wife," she said. "I can cook and clean and mend clothes. I will earn my keep." "This is not about keeping," Graham said gently, "but if working will make you feel better, I will not stop you." The house was indeed small, just 2 rooms and a kitchen area. Graham had rented it furnished when he arrived in town, planning to stay only long enough to earn money for supplies before moving on. Now, watching Laura look around the modest space, he felt ashamed that he could not offer her more. "There is bread and some dried beef in the pantry," he said. "I know it is not much for a supper, but tomorrow I will go to the store and get proper provisions." "Bread is fine," Laura said. She moved to the small table and sat down heavily, as if her legs could no longer support her. The exhaustion was written in every line of her body. Graham prepared a simple meal, aware of how inadequate it was. As they ate in silence, he tried to think of what to say. Laura picked at her food, eating little despite the fact that she looked half-starved. "Your father," Graham ventured carefully. "Had he been ill long?" Laura set down her bread. "He had mining fever. Thought if he could just find one good strike, all our troubles would be over. Instead, he borrowed money from everyone who would lend it, bought equipment and claims that produced nothing, and drank away what little we had left. When the cave-in happened 2 weeks ago, I think part of me was relieved. Is that terrible?" "It is human," Graham said. "Grief is complicated." "I have not had time to grieve properly," she said quietly. "Everything happened so fast. One day I had a father and a home, and the next I had neither. The creditors came before he was even buried. They took the house, the furniture, everything. Sheriff Morrison said I could either agree to the auction or he would have to arrest me for the debt. At least this way the debt is settled and I am not in jail." Graham felt anger rise in his chest, hot and righteous. The law should not allow such things. "The law cares little for women with no money or family," Laura said with a bitter laugh. "I am just grateful you are not like Hutchins or some of the others. I saw the way they looked at me." They finished their meal in silence. Graham showed Laura to the bedroom, which contained only a narrow bed and a small chest of drawers. He brought her a clean shirt of his to sleep in since she had nothing else. "Thank you," she said, standing in the doorway, "for everything. I know this is not what you wanted when you came to Clifton Hill." "Maybe it is exactly what I needed," Graham said. "Sleep well, Laura." He closed the door and returned to the main room. He made himself a bed on the floor with blankets, though he doubted he would sleep much. The events of the day played through his mind on an endless loop. He had a wife now. A real wife, even if the marriage was in name only. The reality of it was overwhelming. In the bedroom, Laura lay awake as well, staring at the ceiling. She had expected so much worse. When the sheriff had told her about the auction, she had spent 2 days imagining all the horrible fates that could await her. But Graham Eckhart was different from what she had feared. There was a gentleness in his rough exterior, a kindness in his eyes that made her think perhaps God had not entirely abandoned her. She thought about her father, about how his dreams had destroyed them both. Marcus Patterson had been a good man once, before the mining fever took hold. Her mother had died when Laura was 12, and her father had never recovered from the loss. He had poured his grief into the fantasy of striking it rich, always certain that the next claim would be the one that made their fortunes. Laura had watched their money dwindle, had taken in sewing and washing to try to keep them afloat, but it had never been enough. And now here she was, married to a stranger, dependent on his charity. She hated the helplessness of her position, but she also recognized that Graham had saved her from something much worse. The next morning, Graham woke before dawn as was his habit. He dressed quietly and went outside to bring in wood for the stove. When he returned, Laura was already up, wearing her dress from the day before. She had braided her hair and her face looked fresher despite the dark circles under her eyes. "I hope I did not wake you," Graham said. "I am an early riser," Laura replied. "Let me make breakfast." "It is the least I can do." She moved around the small kitchen with practiced efficiency, making coffee and frying eggs with the supplies she found. Graham watched her, struck by how natural she looked in his home. When she set the plate in front of him, their eyes met and held for a moment before she looked away. "This is good," Graham said after his first bite. "Thank you." They ate together as the sun rose, painting the room in golden light. Graham found himself relaxing slightly. Perhaps this arrangement could work. Perhaps they could build something resembling a life together, even if love never entered into it. After breakfast, Graham prepared to go into town. "I need to find work," he explained. "I used my last money yesterday and we will need provisions." "Will you be all right here alone?" "I will be fine," Laura assured him. "I am used to being by myself." Graham hesitated at the door. "If anyone bothers you, the marshal's office is just down the street." "I know where it is," Laura said with a small smile. "Go, we need the money." The mine office was crowded with men looking for work. Graham waited his turn and finally spoke with the foreman, a lean man named Stevens who looked him up and down critically. "You done mining before?" Stevens asked. "Some. Mostly I have done ranch work, but I can handle a pick and shovel." Stevens nodded. "We can use men. Pay is $2 a day. Work starts at dawn and ends at dusk. You get 1 day off a week. Interested?" "Yes, sir. Start tomorrow. Be here at first light." Graham felt relief wash over him. $2 a day was not much, but it would keep them fed and sheltered. He stopped at the general store on his way home and bought flour, beans, salt pork, and a few other necessities on credit, promising to pay after his first week of work. Virgil, perhaps feeling guilty about his role in the auction, extended the credit without question. When Graham returned home, he found Laura had cleaned the house from top to bottom. The windows sparkled, the floors had been swept, and the air smelled of lye soap. "You did not have to do all this," Graham said, setting down the supplies. "I needed to keep busy," Laura said. "Idle hands make for a troubled mind," my mother used to say. They prepared lunch together, falling into an easy rhythm that surprised them both. Laura talked a little about her childhood, about the years before her father's obsession took hold. Graham found himself sharing stories about the ranch in Montana, about the vast sky and the hard winters and the satisfaction of working with his hands. "You miss it?" Laura asked. "Your home?" "Sometimes. But there was nothing left for me there after my parents died. My older brother inherited the ranch and made it clear I was not needed. I have been drifting ever since, looking for a place that feels right." "And has any place felt right?" Graham looked at her, at the way the afternoon light caught in her auburn hair, and felt something shift in his chest. Maybe this one could. Laura felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. She looked away, suddenly flustered. This was not supposed to happen. She was not supposed to feel anything for this man beyond gratitude. But there was something about Graham Eckhart that called to her, something solid and safe that she had not known she craved until now. The days fell into a pattern. Graham left before dawn to work in the mines, returning home covered in dust and exhausted. Laura kept the house, cooked their meals, and slowly began to venture into town. The other women of Clifton Hill were not unkind, though Laura could see the pity in their eyes. She held her head high and went about her business, refusing to be ashamed of circumstances beyond her control. 3 weeks after their wedding, Graham came home to find Laura sitting at the table with tears streaming down her face. He immediately crossed to her, his exhaustion forgotten. "What happened? Did someone hurt you?" Laura shook her head. "No, nothing like that. I went to see Reverend Palmer today. He told me that some of the church women have been saying unkind things about me, about how I trapped you into marriage for your money." She laughed bitterly. "As if you had any money to trap you for." Graham knelt beside her chair. Without thinking, he reached out and took her hand. It was the first time they had really touched since the wedding, and he felt a spark run through him at the contact. "Anyone with sense can see how things really are," he said firmly. "You did not trap anyone. I made my choice freely, and I do not regret it for a moment. Do you hear me? Not for one single moment." Laura looked at him through her tears. "Why are you so kind to me?" "I have brought you nothing but trouble." "You have brought me more than you know," Graham said. He reached up and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Before you, I was just existing, moving from place to place without purpose. Now I have a reason to work hard, a reason to come home at the end of the day. You have given me that, Laura. You have given me hope for something more than a lonely life." Laura felt something break open inside her chest. She turned her hand in his and squeezed his calloused fingers. "I was so frightened that day," she whispered. "So certain my life was over, but maybe it was just beginning." Graham smiled, really smiled, and Laura realized it was the first time she had seen him do so. It transformed his rough features, made him almost handsome. She felt her heart skip a beat. "May I hug you?" Graham asked softly. "Just to comfort you, nothing more." In answer, Laura stood and stepped into his arms. He held her carefully as if she were made of glass. She pressed her face against his chest and breathed in the scent of him, dust and sweat and something uniquely Graham. She felt safe there, protected in a way she had not felt since her mother died. They stood that way for a long moment before Laura pulled back. "Thank you," she said. "I should start dinner." "Let me help," Graham offered. As they worked side by side in the small kitchen, something had shifted between them. The touches were more frequent now, hands brushing as they passed items back and forth. Graham found reasons to stand close to Laura, and she did not move away. The air felt charged with possibility. That night, as Graham lay on his makeshift bed in the main room, he could not sleep. He kept thinking about the feel of Laura in his arms, the softness of her hair against his chin. He had never wanted anything as much as he wanted to be worthy of her, to earn the right to call her his wife in truth. In the bedroom, Laura was having similar thoughts. She had not expected to develop feelings for Graham, but somewhere over the past weeks, gratitude had transformed into something deeper. She admired his work ethic, his quiet strength, his gentle consideration of her feelings. He never pushed, never demanded, just gave and gave without asking for anything in return. The following Sunday, their day off, Graham suggested a walk into the desert. The heat of summer was approaching, but the mornings were still pleasant. Laura agreed, and they set out after breakfast. Graham led her to a spot he had discovered a mile from town, where a natural spring created a small oasis of green among the red rocks. Laura exclaimed with delight at the sight of the water and the cottonwood trees growing beside it. "This is beautiful," she said, sitting on a smooth boulder near the spring. "How did you find it?" "I like to walk on my days off," Graham said, settling beside her. "Clear my head after being underground all week." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sound of the water and the birds singing in the trees. Graham gathered his courage and reached for Laura's hand. She laced her fingers through his without hesitation. "Laura," he said quietly, "I know our marriage began in difficult circumstances, and I have not wanted to pressure you, but I need you to know that my feelings have grown beyond what I expected. You are not just someone I helped, you have become dear to me, very dear." Laura turned to face him, her heart pounding. "I feel the same way. I did not think it was possible to care for someone so quickly, but you have been so good to me, Graham. You have given me back my dignity, my hope. How could I not fall in love with you?" Graham's breath caught. "Love?" "Yes," Laura said, a shy smile curving her lips. "I love you. I think I have for a while now, but I was afraid to say it." Graham cupped her face in his hands, his touch reverent. "I love you too. I have loved you since the moment I saw you standing there so brave and strong. I think I bid on you not just to save you, but because something in me recognized that you were meant to be mine." "And you were meant to be mine," Laura whispered. Graham leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Laura met him halfway, their lips coming together in a kiss that was tentative at first, then deepening as weeks of restrained emotion broke free. Graham pulled her closer, and Laura wound her arms around his neck, pouring everything she felt into the kiss. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard. Graham rested his forehead against Laura's, his eyes closed. "I want to be a real husband to you," he said, "if you will have me." "I want that too," Laura said. "I want us to be a true family." They stayed at the spring for hours, talking and kissing and making plans for their future. Graham spoke of his dream to own land someday, to build a real home and maybe raise horses. Laura shared her love of books and her wish to teach children to read. They wove their dreams together, creating a shared vision of the life they could build. When they returned home that evening, everything had changed. Graham moved his things into the bedroom, and that night they came together as husband and wife in truth. Graham was gentle and patient, and Laura felt cherished in a way she had never imagined possible. Afterward, lying in his arms, she knew she had found where she belonged. The weeks turned into months. Graham continued working at the mine, and Laura took in sewing to add to their income. They saved every penny they could, dreaming of the day they could buy land. The people of Clifton Hill slowly accepted them as a real couple, seeing the obvious love between them. In August, Laura realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week to be sure before telling Graham. He came home from work to find her standing in the doorway, wringing her hands nervously. "What is wrong?" he asked immediately. "Nothing is wrong," Laura said quickly. "At least I do not think so. Graham, I am with child." For a moment Graham just stared at her. Then a smile broke across his face, so wide and joyful that Laura laughed with relief. He swept her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Laura asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Graham said. He set her down gently and placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "I am going to be a father. You have given me everything, Laura. A home, a purpose, and now a family. I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you." "You already deserve me," Laura said, covering his hand with hers. "You are the best man I have ever known." That night, they talked late into the night about the baby. They discussed names and made plans for how to prepare for the new arrival. Graham promised to work extra shifts if possible, to save money for the things they would need. The pregnancy was not easy. Laura suffered from sickness in the mornings and exhaustion that left her sleeping through the afternoons. Graham took over more of the household tasks, doing his best to care for her while still working long hours at the mine. He never complained, only showed concern for her well-being. In the 4th month of her pregnancy, disaster struck. A fire broke out in one of the mine shafts. Graham and 3 other men were trapped underground for 8 hours before they could be rescued. Laura nearly went mad with worry, standing outside the mine entrance with the other wives, praying for the men to be brought out alive. When Graham finally emerged, covered in soot and coughing from the smoke, Laura ran to him and threw her arms around him, sobbing. He held her tight, promising he was all right, that he was not hurt. "I cannot do this," Laura said through her tears. "I cannot sit at home every day wondering if you will come back to me. What if something had happened to you? What would I have done?" Graham smoothed her hair back from her face. "Nothing happened. I am right here." "But it could have. Graham, that mine has taken so many lives. I cannot bear the thought of losing you." That night, Graham made a decision. "I am going to quit the mine," he told Laura. "There is a ranch about 10 miles from here. I heard the owner is looking for hands. The pay is less, but it is safer. I will not put you through that fear again." "But the money," Laura protested. "We need to save for the baby, for our future." "We will manage," Graham said firmly. "You and this baby are more important than any amount of money. I will find another way." True to his word, Graham went to the ranch the next day and secured a position. The work was hard and the pay was indeed less, but he was good with horses, and the ranch owner, an older man named Samuel Garrett, took a liking to him. Graham left for the ranch before dawn each day and returned after dark, but Laura could see he was happier. The ranch work suited him better than being underground. Laura's pregnancy progressed. Her belly grew round and she felt the baby move inside her. Graham would sit with her in the evenings, his hand on her stomach, feeling the kicks and flutters. His face would light up with wonder each time. "Do you think it is a boy or a girl?" he would ask. "I do not know," Laura would reply, "but I hope he or she has your strength and kindness." "And your courage and beauty," Graham would counter. In February 1884, when the desert was experiencing one of its rare cold spells, Laura went into labor. Graham rode through the night to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Chen, who had delivered half the babies in Clifton Hill. The labor was long and difficult, lasting almost 20 hours. Graham stayed by Laura's side the entire time, holding her hand and wiping her brow, whispering encouragement. Finally, as dawn broke, their son came into the world with a lusty cry. Graham cut the cord with trembling hands while Mrs. Chen cleaned the baby. When she placed the squirming bundle in Laura's arms, both parents wept. "He is perfect," Laura whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes. "What should we call him?" Graham asked, touching the baby's soft, dark hair. "I was thinking Gabriel," Laura said. "Gabriel Marcus Eckhart, after my father. Despite everything, he gave me life, and I want to honor that." "Gabriel Marcus Eckhart," Graham repeated. "It is a strong name. Hello, Gabriel. I am your father, and I promise to love and protect you all your days." The baby turned toward Graham's voice, and Graham felt his heart expand impossibly. He had thought loving Laura was the greatest feeling he would ever know, but this was different, deeper in some ways. This tiny person was part of both of them, a living symbol of their love. The first months of parenthood were exhausting. Gabriel was a hungry baby who woke often through the night. Laura was tired all the time, and Graham did his best to help when he came home from the ranch, walking Gabriel around the house so Laura could sleep. But despite the exhaustion, they were happy. Graham would come home to find Laura nursing Gabriel in the rocking chair he had built, humming softly, and his chest would fill with such love he could hardly breathe. On his days off, he would hold Gabriel for hours, studying every expression that crossed the baby's face, marveling at this miracle they had created. When Gabriel was 6 months old, Graham came home with news. "Mr. Garrett is getting too old to run the ranch himself," he said. "His children all moved east and have no interest in returning. He has offered to sell me the ranch at a very favorable price, with payments over time." Laura looked up from where she was playing with Gabriel on a blanket on the floor. "That is a huge opportunity, but can we afford it?" "Barely," Graham admitted. "It would mean being very careful with money for years. But it would be ours, Laura. Land of our own, a real home for Gabriel and any other children we might have. What do you think?" Laura considered. It would be a risk, but Graham was a hard worker and good with animals. If anyone could make a success of the ranch, it was him. And the thought of having a real home, of building something permanent, was enormously appealing. "I think we should do it," she said. "I think we should take the chance." Graham grinned and swept her into his arms, careful not to disturb Gabriel. "We are going to be ranchers," he said. The transition took several months. Graham continued working for wages while learning everything Mr. Garrett could teach him about running the ranch. Laura visited the property often, planning where to put a garden and imagining how they would expand the small ranch house. When Gabriel was almost a year old, the deal was finalized. The ranch was theirs, all 600 acres of it. It was not much compared to the great cattle ranches of Texas, but to Graham and Laura, it was everything. They moved to the ranch in the spring of 1885. The house needed work, but it was larger than their place in town and sat on a small rise with a beautiful view of the surrounding desert and mountains. Laura loved it immediately. Graham threw himself into the work with enthusiasm. He bought a small herd of cattle and several horses, planning to breed and sell quality stock. Laura helped where she could, though caring for Gabriel took up much of her time. They hired a ranch hand named Tommy, a young man of 19 who was eager to learn and strong as an ox. Life on the ranch was hard but satisfying. Graham was up before dawn every day, tending to the animals and maintaining the property. Laura kept the house, tended her garden, and took care of Gabriel, who was growing into a sturdy, curious toddler. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch together, watching the sun set over the desert, exhausted but content. In the summer of 1885, Laura discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she was not as sick, and the pregnancy seemed easier despite the demands of ranch life and caring for a young child. Graham was overjoyed at the prospect of another baby, though he worried about Laura taking on too much. Their daughter was born in March 1886, on a warm spring evening when the desert was carpeted in wildflowers. The birth was quicker than Gabriel's had been, and soon Graham was holding his daughter, tears streaming down his weathered face. "She is beautiful, just like her mother," he said, bringing the baby to Laura. "What should we name her?" Laura asked, stroking the baby's downy blonde hair. "I was thinking Lily," Graham said. "After the wildflowers outside, Lily Ann Eckhart." "Lily Ann," Laura repeated. "I love it." "Hello, Lily. Welcome to our family." Gabriel, now almost 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister. He would sit beside Laura and gently pat Lily's hand, saying "baby" over and over. Graham would watch his small family with a sense of awe that never faded. 4 years ago, he had been alone and lonely, drifting through life without purpose. Now he had a wife he adored, 2 beautiful children, and a ranch of his own. It seemed almost too good to be true. The years passed in a blur of hard work and precious moments. The ranch prospered under Graham's careful management. He developed a reputation for breeding fine horses, and buyers came from as far away as Tucson and Phoenix to purchase his stock. Laura's garden flourished, and she sold vegetables in town to add to their income. They were not rich, but they were comfortable and happy. Gabriel grew into a bright, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere, eager to learn about the ranch. Lily was more reserved, preferring to stay close to Laura and help with the cooking and household tasks. Despite their different temperaments, the siblings adored each other. In 1889, when Gabriel was 5 and Lily was 3, Laura gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named James and Rose. Graham paced nervously through the delivery, terrified at the prospect of twins, but Mrs. Chen assured him Laura was strong enough to handle it. She was right. Though the birth was exhausting, both babies were healthy, and Laura recovered quickly. "Our family is complete," Laura said, nursing both babies while Graham corralled Gabriel and Lily, who wanted to see their new siblings. "4 beautiful children. We are so blessed." Graham looked at his wife, still beautiful despite the lines around her eyes and the silver beginning to thread through her auburn hair. "I am the luckiest man alive," he said. "Do you ever think about that day, the auction?" "Sometimes," Laura admitted. "I think about how terrified I was, how certain I was that my life was over. And then you bid on me, this quiet cowboy with kind eyes, and everything changed. You saved me, Graham." "We saved each other," Graham corrected. "I was just existing before you. You gave me a reason to live, to build something lasting. Every good thing in my life came from that day." As the 1890s began, the ranch continued to thrive. Graham expanded the herd and built a larger barn. Tommy had married and moved on, but they hired another hand, an older man named Pete who had worked cattle all his life. Gabriel, now 7, was already a skilled rider and a real help around the ranch. Lily, at 5, had learned to read and was teaching her younger siblings their letters. Life was not without challenges. There were droughts that made water scarce and winters that were harsher than expected. Cattle rustlers were a constant threat, and Graham and Pete had to keep careful watch on the herd. One year, a fever swept through the county and all 4 children fell ill. Laura and Graham barely slept for a week, nursing them through the sickness. When the fever finally broke and all 4 children recovered, Graham held Laura close and thanked God for sparing their family. But through all the challenges, their love remained constant. Graham never stopped being grateful for Laura, never stopped feeling that spark when she smiled at him. Laura, in turn, admired her husband more with each passing year. He was a good father, patient and loving with their children. He worked hard but always made time for his family. He was everything she had not dared to hope for on that terrible day in Clifton Hill. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1893, Graham surprised Laura with a trip to Phoenix. They left the children with Mrs. Chen, who had become a good friend over the years, and took the train to the city. Laura had not been more than 20 miles from Clifton Hill since her wedding day, and she was thrilled by the adventure. In Phoenix, Graham took her to a nice restaurant and bought her a new dress, spending money they really could not spare but not caring. After dinner, they walked through the city streets hand in hand, looking in shop windows and marveling at the electric lights that were beginning to appear. "I wish I could give you more," Graham said. "Fine things, beautiful clothes, trips to far-off places." Laura stopped and turned to face him. "You have given me everything that matters. You have given me love, respect, and a beautiful family. You have made me happier than I ever imagined possible. I would not trade our life for all the fine things in the world." Graham kissed her there on the street, not caring who saw. "I love you, Laura Eckhart. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Laura said, "forever and always." That night in their hotel room, they made love with the same passion and tenderness that had characterized their marriage from the beginning. They were not the same people who had stood before Reverend Palmer 10 years ago, frightened and uncertain. They had been forged by hard work and challenges into something stronger, a partnership built on mutual respect and deep love. The years continued to pass. Gabriel grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father but with his mother's quick mind. At 16, he was already running much of the ranch operation, allowing Graham to slow down a bit. Lily blossomed into a beautiful young woman with her mother's auburn hair and her father's steady temperament. She helped Laura run the household and was patient with her younger siblings. The twins, James and Rose, were 13 now, still inseparable and equally likely to be found causing mischief or working hard, depending on the day. In 1896, tragedy struck when Pete was killed in a riding accident. Graham and the whole family grieved the loss of the man who had become like an uncle to the children. They buried him in a plot on the ranch, and Graham made sure his widow, who lived in town, was cared for financially. "Life is fragile," Graham said to Laura the night after the funeral. "We never know how much time we have. I am so grateful for every day I have had with you." "And I with you," Laura said, holding him close. "We have built something beautiful together, you and I, not just the ranch, but our family, our life. Pete would have been proud to see how far we have come." As the century drew to a close, Graham and Laura began to talk about the future. Gabriel was 19 now, clearly ready to take over the ranch when the time came. He had no interest in leaving, loving the land and the work as much as his father did. "Do you think we should sign the ranch over to him?" Graham asked Laura one evening. They were sitting on the porch as they had done thousands of times before, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "Not yet," Laura said. "You are only 41, Graham. You have many good years left. Let Gabriel continue to learn from you. There is no rush." "I just want to make sure everything is secure for all of you," Graham said. "I never want you to face the uncertainty you did before we met." Laura took his hand. "That will never happen. You have built us a legacy, a home that is truly ours. Our children will never have to worry the way I did. You have given them security and love and a strong example of what a good man should be. That is worth more than any amount of money." In 1899, Lily married a young man named Daniel Preston who owned a neighboring ranch. It was a good match, and Graham approved of the young man's character and work ethic. The wedding was held at the ranch, with half the county in attendance. Laura cried happy tears as she watched her daughter pledge her life to Daniel, remembering her own wedding day so many years ago. "She is so young," Laura said to Graham as they watched Lily dance with her new husband. She is 23, the same age you were when we married, Graham pointed out. And look how well that turned out. Laura smiled. We were lucky. I pray Lily and Daniel will be as happy as we have been. They will be, Graham said confidently. They are marrying for love just as we did. Well, eventually, he amended with a grin. Laura laughed. Eventually indeed, though I think I started falling in love with you the moment you told me I could have the bedroom to myself. I knew then that you were different. I was terrified, Graham admitted. I had no idea what I was doing, bidding on you like that, but it was the best decision I ever made. As the new century dawned in 1900, Graham was 42 and Laura was 40. They had been married for 17 years and had built a life that exceeded their wildest dreams. The ranch was prosperous, their children were healthy and happy, and their love had only deepened with time. Gabriel took over more of the ranch operations, allowing Graham to spend more time working with the horses, which had always been his favorite part of ranching. James and Rose were 16 now, helping with the ranch work and attending school in Clifton Hill when they could. Lily and Daniel visited often and announced they were expecting their first child. You are going to be a grandmother, Graham teased Laura when they got the news. And you a grandfather, Laura retorted. How does that make you feel, old man? Ancient, Graham said, but he was grinning. Though if our grandchild is half as wonderful as our children, I will consider myself blessed. The years of hard living were beginning to show on both of them. Graham's hands were gnarled from decades of physical labor, and his back ached on cold mornings. Laura had arthritis in her fingers that made sewing difficult, though she refused to stop entirely. But they were healthy and active, still able to do most of the work required to run the ranch. In the spring of 1901, Lily gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Marcus Graham Preston, honoring both her grandfather and her father. When Graham held his grandson for the first time, he felt the same overwhelming love he had experienced when each of his own children was born. You have made me so proud, he told Lily. You have grown into an amazing woman. I had good teachers, Lily said, smiling at both her parents. You and Mother showed me what real love looks like, what a strong partnership should be. Daniel and I are trying to build the same kind of marriage you have. Laura hugged her daughter close. You will. I see the way he looks at you, the way you work together. You have chosen well. In 1903, Gabriel married a sweet young woman named Emma from town. She adapted quickly to ranch life, and Laura was grateful for the help with the household as her arthritis worsened. Emma gave birth to a daughter, Sarah, the following year, and the ranch house rang with the sounds of children once again. James and Rose, now 19, were talking about their futures. James wanted to stay on the ranch and help Gabriel, but Rose had other dreams. She had always been the most adventurous of the children, talking about seeing the world beyond Arizona territory. I want to be a teacher, Rose told her parents. There is a training college in California that accepts women. I have been saving my money, and I have enough for the first year. Graham's first instinct was to say no, to keep his daughter close where he could protect her. But Laura squeezed his hand, reminding him that their children needed to follow their own paths. If that is what you truly want, Graham said carefully, then your mother and I will support you, but you must promise to write often and come home for visits. Rose threw her arms around her father. Thank you, Papa. I promise I will make you proud. You already do, Graham said gruffly. Every single day. Rose left for California in the fall of 1904. The house felt empty without her laughter, but she wrote long letters every week, full of stories about her studies and her new friends. Laura read each letter multiple times, grateful that her daughter was pursuing her dreams but missing her terribly. In 1905, James surprised everyone by falling in love with a young widow named Catherine, who had a 5-year-old son. She had moved to Clifton Hill after her husband died of pneumonia, taking work as a seamstress to support herself and her child. James met her when he went to pick up some mending, and he was smitten immediately. "She is amazing, Ma," he told Laura. "She is strong and kind, and her son, Oliver, is a great kid. I know it is complicated, her being a widow with a child, but I love her. I love them both." "Then you should court her properly," Laura said. "Your father and I understand about complicated beginnings. If she makes you happy, that is all that matters." James and Catherine married in the spring of 1906. Oliver, now 6, called James Pa from the first day, and James loved the boy as if he were his own blood. They had a daughter together the following year, naming her Laura after James's mother. "My own namesake," Laura said, holding baby Laura for the first time. "I am honored." By 1907, Graham and Laura were 50 and 47 respectively. They had lived through the end of one century and the beginning of another. Arizona had not yet achieved statehood, but there was talk it would happen soon. The world was changing rapidly, with automobiles beginning to appear and talk of airplanes that could actually fly. But on the ranch, life continued much as it always had. The work of raising cattle and horses did not change with the times. Graham and Laura had stepped back from the day-to-day operations, leaving that to Gabriel and James, but they still contributed where they could. They spent their evenings on the porch, watching the sunset and talking about their lives. Sometimes their grandchildren would climb into their laps, and they would tell stories about the old days, about when Arizona territory was even wilder and more untamed. "Tell us about how you met," Sarah, Gabriel's daughter, would beg. She was 3 now and loved stories. "Well," Graham would begin, settling Sarah more comfortably on his lap, "your grandmother was the bravest woman I ever saw, standing up in front of that whole town even though she was frightened." "And your grandfather was my hero," Laura would continue. "He saved me when I had no one else, and he has been taking care of me ever since." "Did you love him right away, Grandma?" Sarah would ask. "Not right away," Laura admitted, "but I grew to love him very quickly. He showed me through his actions that he was a good man, and I fell in love with who he was. And I loved your grandmother from the first moment I saw her," Graham would say. "I just had to wait for her to love me back." These were the moments Graham treasured most, sitting with his wife surrounded by the family they had created, watching the sun set over the land they owned. He would think back to that day in 1883, when he had spent his last $27.50 on a frightened young woman, and he would marvel at how that single decision had changed everything. In 1909, Rose came home from California, bringing with her a young man named Thomas who taught at the same school where she had taken a position. They were engaged to be married, and Rose was glowing with happiness. "He is wonderful, Papa," she told Graham. "He loves teaching as much as I do, and he wants to move here. There is need for teachers in Clifton Hill, and he thinks we could make a difference." Graham looked at the young man, taking his measure. Thomas met his gaze steadily, and Graham saw honesty and determination in his eyes. "Take care of my daughter," Graham said simply. "She is precious to us." "I will protect her with my life," Thomas promised. Rose and Thomas married in the summer of 1909 and settled in Clifton Hill, where they both taught at the growing school. They visited the ranch often, and Rose was clearly thriving in her chosen profession. By 1910, Graham and Laura had 7 grandchildren, with more on the way. Gabriel and Emma had 3 children now, Sarah, Marcus, and baby Emma. James and Catherine had 2 together plus Oliver from Catherine's first marriage. Lily and Daniel had 2 boys, Marcus and Henry. "We have created quite a dynasty," Graham joked to Laura one evening. They were alone on the porch, a rare occurrence these days with the house always full of children and grandchildren. "We have," Laura agreed. "Can you believe how far we have come? Sometimes I still think about that terrified girl at the auction, and I can hardly believe she was me." "You were always strong," Graham said. "I just gave you a chance to show it. Everything we have built, you built it with me. You have been my partner in every way that matters." Laura leaned her head on Graham's shoulder. "I love you so much. More now than I did even in the beginning, if that is possible. You have been everything I needed, everything I wanted, even when I did not know what that was." Graham kissed the top of her head. "You are my whole world, Laura. Everything good in my life flows from you. Our children, our grandchildren, this ranch, all of it exists because you agreed to take a chance on a lonely cowboy who did not know what he was doing." "You knew exactly what you were doing," Laura said softly. "You were choosing love, even though you called it something else at the time. You were choosing us, choosing this life, and I am so grateful you did." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The sounds of the ranch surrounded them. Cattle lowing in the distance, horses moving in the corral, the wind rustling through the cottonwood trees Graham had planted years ago. In 1911, Arizona finally achieved statehood, becoming the 48th state in the Union. It was a momentous occasion, marking the official end of the frontier era. Graham and Laura traveled to Phoenix with their children and grandchildren for the celebration. At 53, Graham felt every year of his age, but he was proud to witness this historic moment. "We have seen so much change," he said to Laura as they watched the festivities. "When I was born, the Civil War had just ended. Now we have automobiles and airplanes, and Arizona is a state. The world is transforming. But some things never change," Laura said. "Love, family, the importance of working hard and treating people with kindness. Those things are eternal." As they entered their 60s, Graham and Laura slowed down even more. Graham's back troubled him constantly, and Laura's arthritis had spread to her knees, making walking difficult. But they were still sharp mentally and loved spending time with their growing family. Gabriel was now fully in charge of the ranch at 37, and he ran it with the same care and dedication his father had shown. James, at 34, was his partner in the operation. Lily, at 35, was a mother of 3 and helped run Daniel's ranch. Rose, at 32, was making a real difference as a teacher in Clifton Hill, inspiring young minds and building the future of their community. "We did well with them," Graham said to Laura one evening in 1918. They were 71 and 68 now, their bodies worn but their minds still sharp. World War I had just ended, and the world was celebrating peace. "We did," Laura agreed. "They are all good people who contribute to their communities and love their families. We can be proud of that." In 1920, Laura fell ill with pneumonia. Graham sat by her bedside day and night, holding her hand and praying as he had not prayed since that day in the mine when he thought he might die. Their children gathered at the ranch, waiting and hoping. Laura rallied after a week, though she was much weakened. "I am not ready to leave you yet," she told Graham when she was finally able to sit up. "We have more years together, I can feel it." Graham felt tears of relief stream down his weathered face. "Good, because I need you, Laura. I have always needed you." Laura recovered slowly, and by spring she was moving around again, though she tired easily. Graham barely let her out of his sight, treasuring every moment they had together. In 1923, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. The entire family gathered at the ranch for a party that lasted 2 days. There were now 14 grandchildren ranging in age from 19 to 3, and 2 great-grandchildren, with more on the way. Gabriel stood to give a toast at the celebration dinner. "My father once told me about the day he met my mother," he said. "About how he spent his last dollar on her, not knowing what the future would hold, only knowing that he could not stand by and do nothing. That single act of courage and compassion changed all our lives. It gave us this family, this legacy. Everything we have comes from the love between these two remarkable people. So I ask you all to raise your glasses to Graham and Laura Eckhart, who showed us all what true love looks like." "To Graham and Laura," the crowd echoed, raising their glasses. Graham looked at Laura, seeing past the wrinkles and gray hair to the brave young woman who had stood on that stage 40 years ago. She smiled at him, her eyes still bright with love, and he felt his heart swell. "I would do it all again," he whispered to her. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would choose you every single time." "And I would choose you," Laura said. "You are my hero, Graham Eckhart. You always have been." As the celebration continued around them, Graham and Laura held hands and watched their family. 4 children, 14 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren, and more on the way. All of it had started with a frightened young woman and a lonely cowboy who took a chance on love. The years continued to pass peacefully. Graham and Laura spent their days in rocking chairs on the porch, surrounded by family and watching the ranch continue to thrive. They told stories to the younger generations, passing down the history of their family and the values that had sustained them. In 1925, at the age of 78, Graham began to fail. His heart was giving out, the doctor said. There was nothing to be done except make him comfortable. Laura insisted on caring for him herself, just as he had cared for her when she was ill. "I am not afraid," Graham told Laura one evening as they sat together watching the sunset one last time. "I have had a full life, a wonderful life. You gave me everything I ever wanted and more." "Do not talk like that," Laura said, though tears streamed down her face. "I need you to stay." "You will be fine," Graham said gently. "You are the strongest person I know, and I will wait for you, Laura. Wherever I am going, I will wait until you join me and we will have eternity together." Graham Eckhart passed away peacefully in his sleep on May 15, 1925, with Laura holding his hand. He was 78 years old and had lived to see his family flourish beyond anything he had imagined on that day in 1883, when he placed his bid. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people. Graham had become a respected figure in the community, known for his integrity, his kindness, and his devotion to his family. They buried him on a hillside overlooking the ranch, where he could watch over the land he had loved. Laura grieved deeply, but bore her loss with the same strength she had shown throughout her life. She lived for another 8 years, spending her days surrounded by her children and grandchildren, passing on stories and wisdom. She spoke often of Graham, keeping his memory alive for the younger generations who had not known him long. "Your grandfather was the best man I ever knew," she would tell them. "He saved me when I had nothing, and he spent 42 years showing me what love truly means. I am grateful for every moment we had together." Laura Eckhart passed away peacefully in her sleep on June 3, 1933, at the age of 81. They buried her next to Graham on the hillside, where they could rest together overlooking the ranch they had built and the family they had created. Their legacy lived on through their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The ranch remained in the Eckhart family for generations, a testament to the love and hard work of the lonely cowboy and the woman he bid on, who became his first and only love. In later years, when the youngest descendants would ask about the beginning of their family, they would be told the story about a frightened young woman standing at an auction, about a quiet cowboy who spent his last money to save her, about how that single act of courage and compassion grew into a love that lasted a lifetime and created a family that would endure for generations. It was a story of hope and redemption, of taking chances and choosing love even when the future was uncertain. It was the story of Graham and Laura Eckhart, and it would be told and retold, inspiring future generations to believe in the transformative power of love. The end.